Finland isn't building a wall on its Russian border. It's building something way scarier. Finland just finished a 1,340-kilometer border barrier with Russia, except it's not a barrier. It's a nervous system. And if you're a Russian intelligence officer trying to figure out what's happening along Finland's eastern frontier, well, you'd better take another cheap shot of your Ruskaya vodka. For most of the Cold War, Finland handled its relationship with Russia using a philosophy so understated, it's practically a national personality trait. Don't panic, don't provoke, watch everything, quietly, with very good coffee. Hey friends, Wes here, veteran, law grad, and your new favorite defense analyst. And yes, Finland is back on my channel again because they've been making some big moves to foil Putin's imperial agenda. That Finnish strategy worked reasonably well when the threat was tank columns and armored brigades. You see a T-72, you know what it is. You call it in. There's a protocol. Modern threats don't always arrive in tanks. They arrive as migrants pushed across the border under cover of darkness. They arrive as saboteurs with no insignia. They arrive as drones with no transponder. They arrive as electronic warfare you can't see at all. You just suddenly notice your comms stop working and your GPS is lying to you. The old model of border security, a fence and some guards, and a hotline to Helsinki doesn't answer those questions. Finland looked at that problem and reached a very Finnish conclusion. If you can't stop everything, at least make sure you see everything, because the side that detects a threat first usually gets to write the after-action report. And Finland would very much like to write the after-action report.
Confidence is high. I repeat, confidence is high.
So here's the uncomfortable strategic math Finland is working against. Its 1,340-kilometer border with Russia is the longest land frontier between NATO and Russia now that Finland joined the alliance in 2023. That's 830 miles of forest, frozen lakes, terrain that looks like it was designed by a Scandinavian survival instructor, and exactly the kind of geography Russia has historically used to test what it can get away with before anyone notices. Now, Russia doesn't always want to start a war. Sometimes it just wants to create ambiguity. Ambiguity is cheap. A migrant crisis at the border cost Russia almost nothing and forces Finland to deploy resources, make political decisions under pressure, and absorb domestic friction it didn't ask for. A few drones crossing into Finnish airspace costs even less and generates intelligence about detection and electronic interference over a border crossing costs nothing at all and test how quickly Finland can attribute it. That's the hybrid playbook. Small, deniable, cumulative. The goal isn't to conquer. The goal is to make Finland uncertain, reactive, and politically exhausted. A sensor grid ruins that strategy because ambiguity disappears when every movement is recorded. So let's go through what Finland is actually building, because the fence is the least interesting part of this story. Now, the physical barrier is real. Reuters confirmed it includes cameras and sensors integrated along the structure. But the fence is just one node in something considerably larger. The Finnish border guard describes its surveillance architecture as a combination of stationary systems, mobile sensors, patrol units, and rapid response capability. In practice, that means the fence itself is the front edge of a layered detection network that extends inward from the border in both coverage and depth. Then there are the aircraft. Finland purchased 2 new surveillance planes from Sierra Nevada specifically for the border guard to extend monitoring coverage over the eastern frontier. Now, this is where the geometry matters. Ground sensors watch specific corridors. Aircraft scan the broader environment in passes that can cover terrain no ground station reaches. Stack those 2 layers together and you have overlapping coverage across the full length of the border, which means something has to go wrong in multiple independent systems simultaneously to go undetected. That's a much harder problem to engineer around than simply avoiding a single fence. The Joensuu test zone is where it gets genuinely interesting. YLE reported that Finland has built a high-tech border security laboratory in Joensuu right on the Russian frontier, bringing together security companies and government officials to develop what they're calling future digital and physical border security solutions. Autonomous systems, new sensor types, AI-assisted monitoring, digital infrastructure that ties pieces into a coherent operational picture. Think of it as a sandbox where Finnish engineers are actively trying to break their own system before an adversary does. That's a very different approach than installing something and hoping it holds up. It's an iterative development cycle running along a live operational border, which means every lesson feeds back into the next version, and the next version gets fielded before the problem it solves becomes critical. Now, Finnish officials have started using a specific word to describe the overall concept. They call it a shield. Not a wall, not a fortress, not a barrier, a shield. A wall tries to physically stop everything. A shield assumes some things are going to get through and focuses on detecting and responding before they become a problem. That's a fundamentally different philosophy of defense, and it's probably the only one that works in an era where a drone the size of a pizza box can cross a border in 30 seconds at an altitude where you won't hear it coming. You want to know the truth?
You can't handle the truth!
Thanks, Jack. The truth is you can't physically block every pizza box, but you can make the environment so transparent that nothing crosses without triggering a response. Finland's border project is actually a specific answer to one of the most important open questions in modern warfare. What does deterrence look like when the threat is ambiguous, deniable, and cheap? The classic deterrence model assumes the threat is legible. You see the tanks, you respond to the tanks, the other side knows you see the tanks, which changes whether they send the tanks. That worked during the Cold War because the threats were mostly tanks. Hybrid threats break that model because they're designed to stay below the threshold of legible. Was that a Russian drone or a Finnish hobbyist? Was that migrant wave a humanitarian crisis or an organized pressure operation? Was that GPS spoofing over the border equipment failure or an attack? If you can't answer those questions quickly, you can't respond proportionately. If you can't respond proportionately, you'll look weak. And if you look weak, the next provocation gets a little bigger. A sensor grid answers those questions. Detection time drops, attribution gets faster, the ambiguity that makes hybrid tactics viable starts collapsing. And when ambiguity collapses, the cost of each provocation goes up. Because now, Finland can credibly point to exactly what happened, exactly when, and exactly where it came from. That changes the Russian calculation. It's not that Russia can't provoke Finland, it's that provocation becomes expensive in a way it wasn't before, because Finland can respond with precision instead of uncertainty. This is why Finland's border architecture matters beyond Finland. It's a working proof of concept for what NATO deterrence on a long frontier actually looks like in the drone age. Not massive armored formations, not hardened walls, a detection grid, perhaps with a drone wall that makes the border legible in near real time and compresses the response cycle to the point where the attacker's window of ambiguity essentially disappears. NATO doubled its land border with Russia when Finland joined. That's an enormous amount of frontier that needs this kind of coverage. The Joensuu sandbox is where Finland figures out how to do it. If it works, every NATO member with a Russian border has a template. There's a principle in intelligence work that's older than NATO and just as relevant now as it was in 1949. You can't defend what you can't see. Everything downstream of defense, the decision to respond, the choice to respond, the speed of the response, depends entirely on the quality of the picture you had before the threat arrived. Well, Finland gets that. The Finns have spent decades living next door to a country that has a documented taste for ambiguous provocations, deniable incursions, and the kind of gray zone pressure that conventional military force can't cleanly answer. They've had a long time to think carefully about this problem. Their answer isn't the biggest wall in Europe, it's the smartest border in Europe. Sensors, aircraft, digital networks, autonomous monitoring, a detection grid running 1,300 kilometers along the longest NATO frontier with Russia on the continent. It's quiet, it's technical, it generates very few headlines, which is appropriate because the Finnish approach to most things is to do the hard work without announcing it loudly. The rest of NATO might want to take notes because the next provocation along that frontier isn't going to announce itself. It's going to be a drone crossing at 3 a.m. over a frozen lake in a forest that no patrol can physically reach in time. Finland won't send a patrol. It'll already know the drone is there. That's the whole point. Okay, that's it for today, my friends. If you support Ukraine like me, believe in a strong, independent Europe, and hate authoritarians, then this is the channel you've been waiting for. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future videos, and as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.